patches. Not quite as chilly as recent nights, but in the countryside we could see temperatures down to around 3 or 4 Celsius. But it means a fairly bright start to Thursday morning. Some sunny spells, low clouds should lift and break, but we will see some heavy rain moving into the southwest of England. This particularly affecting parts of Devon and Cornwall through the day, but into the afternoon pushes into parts of Wales and then later on into the Midlands. Elsewhere, plenty of sunny spells, a keen easterly wind though holding back temperatures along the east coast, 11 or 12 Celsius, but approaching 20 degrees across central areas in the best of the sunshine. Into the evening time, further showery bands of rain will continue to push northwards, merging to give some longer spells of rain, which will be heavy at times. Dry across parts of Scotland, some low clouds still affecting the east here. And then behind the band of rain, we will see further showers moving in from the south. So it means temperatures not falling as low. We will continue to see single figures in the countryside, but towns and cities holding up in double figures. But it means a much cloudier start to Friday, showery outbreaks of rain for everyone. And then into the afternoon where we get some sunny spells, some really heavy showers developing, some thunder, some hail in there too. But in between, where we get the sunshine, again, temperatures lifting towards the mid-teens. It stays unsettled into the weekend. We'll see some showers or longer spells of rain in places, but staying on the warm side. See you again soon.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News. The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Saturday nights on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan tonight.
Saturday nights on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, live from right outside Buckingham Palace on State of the Nation tonight. Keep calm and carry on. We apologise for the interruption to last night's service. For those of you who might have missed it, here's a reminder of what happened. I'm very sorry to say that it is good evening from me for the time being, as I think that was probably a controlled explosion in the background. I was there with the unflappable and imperturbable royal expert Michael Cole, who carried the flabellum for State of the Nation last night. We'll be coming through all of last night's events, as the Metropolitan Police has confirmed a man was arrested under suspicion of possession of an offensive weapon before conducting a precautionary controlled explosion. Sang-froid prevails. And just stop oil or just stop royal. The eco-zealots have been and intend to continue marching down the Mall towards the Abbey this week. But the Coronation Commander has said he's far more concerned about tight corners. Plus, the Stone of Scone and all its myth, mystery and legend. But who has the ultimate claim? Is it the Scots or perhaps the English? Well, as ever, there'll be a twist in the tale. Stay tuned for that. State of the Nation starts now. We'll also be joined by the historian Dr. David Starkey to help us pick through the pomp and pageantry. But as ever, I want to hear from you. It's the most important part of the programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.uk. Now, you must control your explosions of excitement as you listen to the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Jacob, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, Donald Trump has told GB News tonight he would end the Ukraine war in 24 hours if he was in the White House again. In an exclusive interview with Nigel Farage, the former US president said the war has to be stopped.
If I were president, and I say this, I will end that war in one day. It'll take 24 hours. I know Zelensky well. I know Putin well. I would get that ended in a period of 24.
You can break that deal.
100%. It would be easy. That deal would be easy. A lot of it has to do with the money. A lot of it has to do with the military, that we're giving. But I would get that deal done within 24 hours. That war has to be stopped. That war is a disaster.
Yeah. Donald Trump talking to Nigel Farage a short time ago. Well, Ukraine denies it was behind a drone attack on the Kremlin. A video has appeared which appears to show President Putin's residence being hit late last night. Russia says it was an assassination attempt, but the attack was thwarted, they say, with electronic defences disabling the aircraft. President Zelensky has today said Ukraine had nothing to do with it.
We don't attack Putin or Moscow. We fight on our territory. We are defending our villages and cities. We don't have, enough weapon for this. That's why we don't use it anywhere. For us, that is the deficit. We can't spend it. And we didn't attack Putin. We leave it to tribunal.
Well, here at home, the Prime Minister says he's aware tomorrow's local elections in England will be tough for the Conservative Party. On the last day of campaigning, Rishi Sunak says he's focused on delivering the people's priorities.
We're concentrating on delivering on people's priorities. So at a local level, that's about lower council tax, where Conservative areas have council tax that's on average £80 lower than Labour ones. Crime is lower and we fill more potholes. Nationally, I'm focused on my 5 priorities.
Well, for his part, Sir Keir Starmer says his mission was to get into government by 2024, and he says the Conservative Party should make gains to show it's not going backwards.
I have to say the baseline for the government is very, very low because they had terrible results 4 years ago, which is the cycle of these elections. That was their second worst election result in their history, and Theresa May had to personally apologise to their candidates afterwards. So they should be making significant gains tomorrow.
And lastly, 3 dresses once owned by Diana, Princess of Wales, will go on display at the Museum of Style Icons in Ireland before going to auction. The glamorous outfits will officially go under the hammer in Los Angeles in the United States in August. They're expected to sell for between $280,000 and £550,000. On TV, online, DAB+ radio and the TuneIn app. This is GB News.
What happened last night? I was about to sit here. I was looking forward to waxing eloquent about the Royal Standard flying behind me and the amazing tulips that are standing to attention as if they're being drilled by a sergeant to make them ready for the coronation. But before we came on air, moments before, there was the order to evacuate because a man had been arrested. Apparently he had been throwing gun inserts, cartridges, into Buckingham Palace just through the gate, and after that, a little bit later, they had a controlled experiment when we were controlled explosion when we were broadcasting from a porter cabin, and at that point we were moved out and stood behind the fence and carried on with as much of the programme as we could, with Dan Wootton filling in very kindly and very helpfully from Paddington. We tried to keep calm and carry on. We thought that's what we should do. I've always very much liked, in the Carry On film, Carry On Up the Khyber, the scene where everything is going wrong for Sid James, when the ceiling is falling in, when the instruments being used by the little chamber orchestra are collapsing in front of the fire that's coming from the enemy, but they carry on with their soup even though it's got bits of plaster in it. I've always thought that's the best way to do it. But we've got some more information on this from Mark White, so let's go over to Mark White for his report on this.
Around the garrison town of Aldershot, these guardsmen of the Household Division have spent recent days rehearsing for their part in the coronation ceremony.
Number 18 Company!
They'll form the King's Guard, escorting the Sovereign's carriage to and from Westminster Abbey, in what will amount to the biggest ceremonial and security operation seen on the streets of the capital for many years. Coordinated by the Metropolitan Police, the operation will bring together all of the emergency services, the military and the security services.
The security operation around the coronation is rather significant. It's very similar to the Queen's funeral. We've got a layered approach that consists of a number of actually very visible policing presence. So we've got our mounted officers, our firearms officers, and we've got our military colleagues. So this is a joint effort.
Tuesday evening's security incident at Buckingham Palace demonstrated the rapid reaction of the police. Thousands will be on duty alongside the military. Understandably, these soldiers are immensely proud of the part they're playing in this huge state occasion. They're not expecting any trouble, but they're highly trained and able to respond to anything untoward.
We do a lot of practice, ensure that things that go wrong don't go wrong because we've ironed them out in the first place. But then our military training kicks in. We're used to, challenges, and our training helps with these situations.
Saturday's coronation is all the more complex given the many heads of state and other VIPs from around the world who'll descend on the capital for the ceremony.
They'll be looking through the intelligence picture, they'll be working with single issue groups trying to work out who might be a threat to the coronation. But, the threats can come from the sewers right up to the skies with drones, so they really have to be alert on the day.
In the days ahead, the public will certainly notice the huge increase in security, not just around central London, but in other population centres where coronation celebrations are taking place. Luckily, the police and security services have had many months to plan this operation. But then, so have those who might be intent on disrupting this huge world event. Mark White, GB News.
For more from our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, remember to tune in to Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel tomorrow morning. But I'm joined now by the former head of Royal Protection, Di Davis. Di, perhaps you could tell us a little from your expertise of how Royal Protection would be thinking at the moment, how worried they would be, and what a sense of proportion they've got to get, because to have an event like a coronation, there has to be some risk, doesn't there?
Well, good evening. Nice to be on your programme, and well done yesterday for carrying on. I love Up the Khyber too, and it's a good foundation. And in terms of your question, they've been preparing for this and have huge experience, obviously, in preparing for such a large event. But there's always a potential for harm. As you know your history, and I certainly know it as a historian now, going back centuries, our kings and queens have been attacked. And I think you should always bear that in mind, because there are a number of different groups out there who could and maybe pose a threat. I'm not being alarmist, but you've got to prepare. And if you don't prepare, you will fail. So hopefully, months of planning in conjunction with all the other agencies have actually got it right.
Is it easier to tackle the organised terrorists and hostile states because you can have agents close to them, you can be monitoring them, than it is to spot the lone madman? That Queen Victoria had any number of assassination attempts on her, which were almost entirely by lone madmen, and that I imagine is very hard for the security services to pick up.
Well, you're right, and I've no doubt GCHQ will be looking at all the established ISIS, the whole range of people, including the Irish issue, and that hasn't gone away, despite people wishing it away. There are still elements, as you know, in Northern Ireland who would like to do harm to King Charles, etc., etc. But you're right. What you have to worry about are clean skins, as they're known. Those who suddenly wake up or have woken up a week or two, or even on the morning, and say, "Go and do my bidding," whichever God they believe in. And unfortunately, we have several hundreds, if not thousands, of those who admire that kind of tactic. So they're certainly. The other one, as we saw yesterday, with those who arguably may be mentally ill or fixated. And there are a number of those who are a small minority, but they could pose and have posed. As you rightly say, Queen Victoria was attacked 9 times, but many, many more plots against her, both in Scotland, in Ireland, and so on. But yes, and virtually all, including Her late Majesty, people were plotting and trying to do harm to her here in this country, in Ireland and abroad. So you're quite right to point these things out, so you can never be complacent. And I always recall what happened in the Netherlands when a car driver drove straight through the crowd, killing 8 or 9 and injuring many more. So you've got to have all your strategies and tactics in place.
But you've got to accept some element of risk. You cannot have an 18th century carriage going through the streets of London with millions of people watching without there being some element of risk. And it's a question of being proportionate, isn't it? Otherwise, the royals would never be allowed to leave their palaces, or would always go around like the American president does in the Beast or something like that.
Well, you're absolutely right. And of course, the Metropolitan Police will have uniform there in various stages. They will look at those key areas, and they will also be looking at this group of disruptors who've promised. And I've been on several programs today, some of it with some of them, Republicans and others, who are allegedly going to plot to disrupt. Now, the new legislation, which came out yesterday or today, will provide the police with greater powers. And I do hope the Metropolitan Police, they're very good at some of these things, will have the backbone to take these people out if necessary, because this is an ancient tradition we have, and the small minority should not be allowed to disrupt it. And I would do everything I could, if I was the police commander, to disrupt them as well.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us and with our viewers. With me now is the eminent historian, Dr. David Starkey. David, you can give us an historic perspective on this, probably going back to Henry IV of France, who was killed by a madman, that there have been risks to monarchy as long as monarchy has existed.
Indeed. Of course, the worst ones were when there was intense ideological divide. Of course, William of Orange, again, murdered again by fanatics of either side. On the other hand, we are not in that age. We almost got there with the IRA, and we bear the terrible marks of it. I mean, listening to your conversation, particularly listening to your powerful repetition of the word proportionality. I'd like to reflect on not so much history, my own experience as a boy and growing up. I never saw an armed policeman until I went to Paris in 1958, and I was shocked. And I remain shocked at seeing armed police, standing there casually flicking their hands on the trigger. I do not think this is the British way of doing things. I think that the perpetual concern with security, although I recognise a necessity, has damaged us and damaged us profoundly. I think one of the ways in which the distance between the people and the politicians has become unbridgeable is because of security. The symbol of the gates of Buckingham Palace, of Downing Street. It used to be, again, when I was growing up, it was a matter of pride. You could just wander down the street and stand in front of the door and chat to the policeman and whatever, and we've lost something.
Yes, but, I speak every day when I get into House of Commons to the armed police there, who are actually rather brave because they don't know what's going to happen. They're unaware of the circumstances that could arise during the course of the day. I used to say good morning to Keith Palmer, the policeman who was murdered doing his duty, though he was unarmed. And it has, in that sense, become a more dangerous world because the bad people have access to more effective weapons.
No, sorry, I'm not denying any of this. I'm just saying I think what we ought to be doing is recognising what we've lost. We need to recognise the corruption of security, because what security does is to produce distance. It separates. Where we are now, the whole of this space here in front of the Buckingham Palace, the Victoria Monument, was specifically constructed to enable the people to have access. That is less and less possible. There is less and less proximity. There is more and more sense of distance. And of course, again, let us just reflect on your experience last night, the tendency to dare one use the expression, overkill. And I do think that word proportionality needs to be drummed into everybody concerned in this. That we resort to it as a universal technique. We protect, and I think we overprotect. And you were making the absolutely right point. There is an inherent risk. And in a democracy, in an open democracy, a plural democracy, we have to acknowledge that.
We have to take that risk. And I think, particularly for politicians, that I think one of the great glories of our political system is that politicians are extremely open to their constituents through constituency
and we know there have been terrible problems.
And there have been terrible problems.
Yeah.
But we mustn't allow those problems to make politicians more remote, because otherwise you lose that democratic link.
That is exactly what I'm talking about. And I think it's also fundamental to the nature of our monarchy. It cannot be too remote. It cannot be, as you put it beautifully, it cannot be a monarchy that simply exists in palaces, that is simply behind closed gates. Again, one of the great innovations of the 20th century of the Windsor monarchy has been, OK, we can laugh about it and it's artificial, and where do you come from, the handshake and the walkabout, but it has profound effects.
Very important.
And once again, these get further and further hedged about, even if it's something as relatively innocuous as an egg. But what is extraordinary is the people doing those sort of demonstrations are exactly the ones who clamour against remoteness, and they don't understand that their behaviour is precisely the thing that brings about what they claim most to fear.
Well, thank you very much to David. Remember, we want your thoughts on this. Do you think we've got the balance right? mailmog@gbnews.uk. Coming up next, our friends at Just Stop Oil are never ones to turn down an opportunity for attention, even during the lead up to the coronation. Find out what they've been up to after our break. And Jacob's Pillow Stone. What is it? Is it something I use every night? Wait and see. We're going to tell you all about it.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
Is the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Saturday nights on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
Saturday nights on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Phoebe, thank you, Phoebe. I had to email and congratulate Jacob for his coverage last night. So very British and calm. That's a true compliment. Thank you, Phoebe. Richard, what a wonderful range of vocabulary. Jacob has us Googling all night with the beauty of the English language. Well, that's the credit of my father, actually. We used to have a place laid at lunch for the Oxford English Dictionary. Can GB News please produce a weekly roundup of words from Jacob? So educational. Thank you. Rich says, Sir, the behaviour of your good self and the equally unflappable, I would say the even more unflappable actually, Mr. Cole were an example to Englishmen everywhere. A true keep calm and carry on attitude. And yes, it did rather remind me of Carry On Up the Khyber. Well, thank you very much. This week, Just Stop Oil protesters will slow march next to Westminster Abbey in the lead-up to the King's coronation. I actually watched them from my office window this afternoon, just before lunch, as they walked into Parliament Square. There were amazingly few of them. It's extraordinary how few people can cause so much disruption. They don't have that much support. But the group has vowed to protest every day until the government overturns licences given to companies exploring oil and gas in the North Sea. As it happens, while I was briefly Energy Secretary, I was very keen to give out as many licences for exploration in the North Sea as I possibly could, because I want low energy prices for you, the British people. But the police will understandably be on high alert for the next few days after last night's events, and especially since protesters refused to rule out causing havoc on the day of the King's coronation. There's nothing more British than the coronation, so I do hope the protesters will actually keep a stiff upper lip and be as polite as possible. David, I can't see you going on a Just Stop Oil march somehow.
Isn't it odd? I mean, I think, your needle-like perception of character, once again, all those compliments that will now flow towards you. No, I wouldn't. I once went on a march a very, very long time ago when I was young and foolish on the subject of gay rights, and I think we behaved with quite unnecessary flamboyance, which may surprise you less than my going on the march at all. My great problem with the marches, and particularly with the police attitude, or rather lack of attitude towards them, is that these seem to me to be a fundamental challenge to the democratic process. People like Just Stop Oil and whatever, they imagine they have a moral authority which transcends any form of political process. That direct action has become a kind of moral mantra, a sense that the people, presumably the people are too stupid or they're too corrupt. We are a sacred few, we are a band of brothers, we have a right. Again, what they say is, we will do this until we force the government.
And they don't stand for election, which is the point I keep on picking.
Precisely,
when they come on.
And they have the opportunity to do so.
But I'm a great believer in the right of peaceful protest, and the question is, at what point does it switch from being peaceful protest to direct action? That people going on a march is fine, and that should be facilitated, and if it stops the traffic for a little bit, that's perfectly reasonable. People gluing themselves to the road is not fine. But where is the boundary? Isn't it quite difficult to find it precisely?
I think it's when it becomes repeated action which is deliberately designed to produce obstruction. I mean, if you like, the tradition of demonstration is not that you do anything other than the march itself. It is that the march itself, that the shouting of slogans, the waving of banners and whatever, drawing attention. It's a gesture of publicity. What this has become is the equivalent of a kind of strike. And I think that if we actually think of it in those terms, in other words, it ceased to be a demonstration and it's become a form, as you said, of direct action. And all of these things are self-described as direct action.
And you use the word strike, and strikes are heavily prescribed by law,
limited by law.
Democratic mandate, whereas these have no mandate
Precisely.
at all. And they may use it to disrupt the coronation, which is going to give pleasure to tens, if not hundreds of millions around the world, and that seems so deeply selfish.
Can I gently educate you? I think the police may discover a little backbone if they actually start to do that. I think why has the new legislation been passed? Why did it receive the royal assent only yesterday? And it is exactly designed to remove any legal doubt about the kind of action which the police may need to take. I mean, isn't that clearly what it's about? I mean, that you can search, that there are remarks about infrastructure, about locking yourselves to each other, gluing yourselves to each other. I think, in one sense, it's been specifically designed. In another sense, of course, I think it's rather a clever way of getting through a more general modification of the law, and one for which clearly there is immense popular pressure. I think the sense of sheer irritation, particularly in London.
Well, I think that's right, and I think there was a feeling that the law was being used against the motorist going about his or her lawful business rather than against the protester blocking everything up.
And indeed, I think what has happened is that with the general drift of the courts towards extreme interpretations of civil liberties, the notion of the permissible in demonstrations has been steadily widened, and the scope of action of the police steadily reduced.
But not by legislation, by practice.
By the law.
Interesting.
But essentially, I think, by judge-made law. That, again, if you get a particular bias of the judiciary, and the judiciary now leans as clearly to the left as it once leaned to the right, because of the nature of English law, which is essentially judge-made law, the law changes surreptitiously, and I think it's changed very markedly.
But it's to come back to the coronation. You're therefore quite optimistic that there won't be a Just Stop Oil protester in a secret carriage going along to try and slow down the coronation coach.
I think it unlikely. Well, I think they may well try. I would suspect that there'll be a very slick and not terribly gentle operation, because, again, imagine if these people behaved in this fashion in France, what the CARS would do with them.
Yes, but in France they have much worse problems.
Indeed, they do. Indeed, but then, of course, they equally have countermeasures designed to deal with them. But it's a very, very different tradition. It's a different political tradition because, again, we should be talking about this. France, by its revolution, destroyed a concept of political legitimacy. France has never, ever been able to establish a legitimate political tradition. Why 5 republics, 2 empires, 2 monarchies?
And this is why the coronation is so important.
This is why
and
the coronation
shouldn't be interrupted, because it is the essence of political legitimacy of our sovereign.
Precisely, and it's again the thing that, and here you and I may now disagree, and I hope we do, in one sense. I worry that the entire emphasis in this coronation has been on religion. Because it seems to me the coronation is fundamentally a political act, which is why I'm outraged on your behalf that, no, I'm being very serious, that Parliament has been largely excluded. Do you know it's the first time since the Glorious Revolution of 1689 that both houses have not been present in full, and I think this is a deplorable development.
Well, we'll come on to that perhaps a little bit more later, but thank you, David. Coming up next, the sartorial saga. Shall the Lords wear their traditional robes, or day dress, parliamentary robes, much less grand? You'll have to wait until after these messages from our sponsors. But don't forget, perhaps the most interesting stain you could ever imagine, and it's got my name in it.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories. Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us four, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin, that is...
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I remain Jacob Rees-Mogg, and you've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Linda says, just stop oil. I'm sick of them. The majority of the vehicles on the day of the coronation will be powered by horsepower. Real horses. Why don't they get on their bikes and let us enjoy this historic event? Michael says, your reaction last night, together with Michael Cole, reminded me of my relative, Bruce Belfrage, who read the 9 o'clock BBC News during World War II. Belfrage carried on reading despite Broadcasting House being hit by a German missile during his broadcast. I have a feeling he may have done it in black tie, so I'm sorry I'm so dressed down, and I don't even have a parliamentary robe that I'm entitled to wear either. Anyway, That leads on to the last-minute fashion U-turn. You never thought that I would start discussing fashion, but in an exceptional GB News exclusive, the Palace has decided to allow members of the House of Lords to wear their traditional historic robes to this week's ceremony. The peers, the noble lords, were a little bit miffed at the thought of being denied their 17th century crimson velvet robes and wearing nothing more distinguished than their parliamentary robes, although they still won't be wearing coronets. Criticism has arisen regarding the cutback cost of the coronation and fears it would be a scaled-back event. But no, not to fear, it's one little victory for tradition, and the glorious pomp and pageantry will be on at least partly full display. But this is something further to discuss with David Starkey. David, coronets, shouldn't they have their coronets as well?
Oh, they should. And the trouble is, this illustrates the terrible problem of random constitutional change. The exclusion of the hereditary peerage by Blair in 1999, which culminates, of course, a long, long process going right back to George V agreeing to the Parliament Act in 1911. It leaves a terrible gap. You must have watched the film of the last coronation, of the Queen's coronation, that wonderful Technicolor film. What you see about it is that it's fundamentally a piece of theatre. Yes, I know it's sacred, but then, of course, so much church ritual is a magnificent form of theatre. But it's a form of theatre, and in fact, the space in front of the high altar of Westminster Abbey is called the Coronation Theatre. It's its technical name, and the film shows that the 53 coronation was genuine grand opera. You have the star, the Queen, largely in white, surrounded by women, largely in white. And then you had a sea of elderly gentlemen, largely in scarlet and white. And it was like a chorus of grand opera. And again, like a chorus in opera, they augmented the action. So at the moment that the crown was placed upon the Queen's head, all the peers' coronets went on, and all the peeresses, of course, who were in sleeveless gowns, raised their arms, it was said, like the swans in Swan Lake, and put their coronets on.
And this is a reminder that the sovereign is the fount of all honour, and that you put your coronet on directly in a link to the crown going on the crown of your sovereign.
It is, but it's also the theatre of it. If you think back again, dare I use the word theatre, about the late Queen's funeral, the moment that was by far the most moving was one of formal ceremony, which people probably didn't understand. It was when the crown came off the coffin. You had that sense of mere mortality being left after monarchy had been stripped from it.
But it's the symbolism that underpins the theatre. It seems to me that theatre for the sake of theatre is essentially vacuous, but the peers showing loyalty, fealty to the sovereign as representatives of the nation is how our country is governed, our constitution used to be, but that they still represent the history and the tradition of that, and the political nation being assembled in the Abbey, and that the authority of the Crown goes both ways, and the Crown takes an oath to the people, and the people swear fealty. That is then symbolised in a great piece of theatre, which is remembered for the rest of the reign.
Unfortunately, of course, we have got rid of that theatre, and we substituted in the wrong place in the service this extraordinary business of asking people who do not understand the words, which sound like some sort of pledge from Mussolini's Italy in the 1930s, to repeat them. Again, if they were rewriting the coronation, they should have done it properly. That's to say, the coronation oath at the beginning should have been reconceived, so that it becomes a statement which the king agrees to rule according to the laws passed by statute in Parliament as representing the body of the people of the realm or something. Now, at which point there could then be it should have been done by a mutual acclamation. And I think that would have conveyed what used to be conveyed by elaborate symbolism, by the notion of a kind of intermediary class between the monarch and the people, now long gone, but leaving this gaping hole which nobody has thought how to fill. And this is what concerns me. When you use this word modernisation, shouldn't we have learned its danger from the Blair
I've always thought the word
years?
modernisation is a swear word, and it shouldn't be used before the watershed on GB News.
And especially when it's used in conjunction with monarchy, it's a vile antithesis. It's an, I mean, to talk about a modern monarchy is a sort of oxymoron.
But the fealty that is sworn is only going to be sworn by the Prince of Wales was very symbolic, wasn't it? That for Edward VII's coronation, I believe, they reduced it to being one peer of every rank, but to symbol all the peers and to symbolise the nation. And just having it done by the King's son seems to me to be narrowing that, and it's therefore not as resounding around the representatives of the nation as it would otherwise be.
It's a failure to think through what they did. I mean, imagine if Harry had had to do it too. Wouldn't it have been perfect?
Well, I think all the royal dukes should have done it.
As they always used to. But again, all of these figures have been brought in, like leading members of the armed forces, to fulfil the great offices for the day of High Constable and High Steward, as the generals and admirals of the armed forces. Shouldn't they have done it? You see what I mean? If we are to reconstruct our political establishment, which is what in effect we're doing, we should have done it properly. It should have been done with advisement, it should have been thought through, and it should have been fully developed. At the moment, this is just sort of nibbling bits of cheese.
But isn't that how it's always happened? That if you go back to the coronation of King Edgar by St Dunstan, it's been nibbled at all the way through, with the wonderful thing, Queen Victoria's coronation, when the American ambassador supposedly reported that Lord Rolle had carried out his ceremonial role of rolling down the stairs, when in fact he'd fallen over.
Holding the barony of Rolle by the service, let's get all this right, holding the barony of Rolle by the service of rolling 3 times down. Remember, 3 times. Yeah, but no, actually, Jacob.
We're going to have to stop on that no. We've got a point of disagreement. Thank you, David. Up next, it's the moment you've all been waiting for. Dr. Starkey will be helping me crack the mystery of my very own pillow stone.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Hello, I'm Calvin Robinson. Do not miss my Common Sense Crusade Saturdays at 7 p.m. Join me for some in-depth discussions on faith.
Is that not the start of the slippery slope?
It's very much so.
And the big moral questions of the day.
I'm baffled.
You've got some nerve.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is still State of the Nation from a crepuscular Buckingham Palace. You've been getting in touch with your male Moggs. Damien, can you ask David Starkey if Camilla will be Queen Consort or Queen? She's going to be the Queen, definitely, unquestionably, and that's already been announced by Buckingham Palace. So I can answer that without asking the great David. Mark says, please bear in mind that scone is pronounced scoon, vis-a-vis the stone of scone. Right, I quite like scone actually, particularly with jam on. But never mind. I'll get the Cornish onto me in a moment, or the Devonish. But perhaps a little-known but riveting story came to the limelight today as former Scottish First Minister Alex Salmond criticised the current First Minister, that seems a popular sport at the moment, Humza Yousaf, for allowing the legendary and mystical stone of scone, as I'm told to pronounce it, to return to Westminster Abbey for the coronation. But what is the stone of scone? Well, it's shrouded in mystery and legend. Some say it originates from Scotland, others from Ireland, and some indeed say it comes from the Holy Land, hence its other rather fitting name, Jacob's Pillow Stone. Now that's Jacob the Patriarch, not sadly me. I don't sleep on a stone pillow or even, like Thomas More, on a wooden pillow. Jacob the Patriarch rested his head on the stone when he had his dream of angels ascending and descending the ladder. It then came to Scotland, but in 1296, during the First Scottish War of Independence, legend has it that the King Edward I, the hammer of the Scots, rescued the stone and subsequently fitted it into the coronation chair, where it has been placed for most British sovereigns' coronations since. The stone has had an exciting life, or as exciting a life as a stone can have, although there's no record of anyone playing ducks and drakes with it, but it's gone from the Patriarch to Longshanks to a suffragette bombing in 1914. It was abducted in the 1950s by a group of Scottish nationalists, which even resulted in the closing of the Scottish border for the first time in 400 years. But I'm now joined by the devout unionist and former Brexit Party MEP, Mr. Brian Monteith. Brian, the stone of scone, was it Jacob's pillow? That's the question for tonight.
Well, I've absolutely no idea if it was Jacob's pillow, and I don't think it'd make a particularly good pillow for you. But what I do think is that Alex Salmond's intervention was the height of absurdity in trying to say there should have been a ring of policemen put round the stone to prevent it being taken down to England. Utter madness.
You're not saying it was a publicity stunt by Alex Salmond to just bring himself to attention and have a pop at his successor? Because he doesn't much like his successors as leader of the SNP, does he?
No, he doesn't. But I think it was more than just trying to draw attention to himself. I think actually it is a desperate attempt to try and appeal to hardcore nationalists, sort of blood and soil nationalists, who don't believe there needs to be a business case. The people that just think actually they should paint their faces in woad and walk down the high street with waving saltire flags. And this will somehow change people's opinions. This was the group that effectively Alex Salmond was appealing to by saying we need to prevent the stone of scone going down to Westminster. Well, I think obviously when King James VI went down and was crowned on it, he did not actually then take it back to Scotland. None of the Stuart kings took it back to Scotland. It stayed there as the stone to be coronated on for all British kings thereafter.
So do you think most people in Scotland actually are pleased that the Stone of Scone is coming back for the coronation, that it's a wonderful link with the ancient Scottish monarchy, and that it's absolutely fitting that it will be in the chair built for it by King Edward I?
Well, if I'm perfectly honest with you, I think most Scots are actually indifferent to the whole issue. I think that we actually know that from polling that the majority of Scots really have not got a great deal of interest in the coronation itself. And I rather suspect that's in part due to the way that this coronation is taking place, with the loss of some tradition. I think the more tradition, the better, the more pomp and circumstance, the better. While the Stone of Scone is part of that, I really don't think this coronation has connected with Scots, and it may not have particularly connected with a lot of British people, even though they're monarchists.
OK, well, thank you very much, Brian. Still here with me to discern through this historical jungle of folklore, fable and fallacy is the perfect man for the job. It's not David Suchet, who dresses up as Inspector Hercule Poirot. It's David Starkey, who is an equally good detective. It's interesting that until the early Scottish kings who became kings of England had a separate coronation in Scotland as well.
Because there was completely separate monarchies.
So it's only after 1707 that you have the union of the monarchies and one coronation.
The last separate coronation of a king of Scots is Charles II. Before he becomes King of England,
yes.
Before he becomes King of England with the Restoration, James II doesn't have, nor do William and Mary. But obviously the issue is settled finally by the Act of Union of 1707. But you see, there's a terrible missed opportunity in all of this, which of course Alex Salmon seized upon. You know, whenever he smells anything fishy, for obvious reasons, he pounces. Have you seen the text of the coronation service? Have you looked at it?
No.
Right. It's worth looking at, because for the first time there is a commentary going down, which I am sure written by Archbishop Welby, going down the right-hand column. And what it fails to do is to explain the extraordinary and special position of Scotland within Union. Because, of course, the stone, as Salmon said, symbolises Edward's attempt to conquest, which fails and is resoundingly defeated at Bannockburn in the next reign of Edward II. But what happens in 1707 is the most remarkable example of a willed union between two peoples that reserves for the much smaller nation, that's to say Scotland, absolute protection of every separate element of nationhood apart from its own parliament. And all those elements will be present in the service. So the moderator of the General Assembly will present the Bible to the sovereign.
And has been at previous coronations. This is not an innovation.
This is not an innovation. Well, it was in 1953. But equally, of course, the monarch has to swear special oaths to protect.
And has already done so.
And has already done so on the accession, because it is required by the separate Scottish legislation that governs 1689 in Scotland. Similarly, you will see the Lord Lion. Scotland has got when we were looking at the Stone of Scone, or is it the other way around? When we were looking at it there, you have the Duke of Buccleuch as the captain of the Scottish Archers, but in the middle, but you then have the Lord Lion, the head of Scotland's separate system of heraldry. He will be there, with the Scottish heralds who will be there. So in every way, Scotland preserves this identity and separateness within the Union and under the Crown.
And the Stone of Scone symbolises this very directly.
No, in other words, what had been the symbol of conquest, that's to say, or projected conquest, now becomes a symbol of reconciliation and cooperation. And that should have been spelled out. And it seems to me, like so many opportunities that could have been spelled out in this coronation, there's been a failure to do so.
But can you rule on the key matter of whether it was in fact Jacob's pillow and whether he rested his head there when he had the dream of the angels going up and down the ladder?
I think it is much more likely to be a bit of genuine Scottish builder's rubble.
Well, I'm not sure. I like the idea of it being, in fact, a stone made for Jacob to snooze on, the snoozing stone of Scone for the patriarch Jacob. Thank you so much to the laudable David Starkey for joining me on what's becoming a relatively chilly evening outside Buckingham Palace. And if you haven't watched his brilliant documentary already, you really should. It's available on the YouTube channel and it's on Watchback and all those things that you can do. But that's all from me. Up next, it's the king of royal coverage, Dan Wootton. Mr. Wootton, what have you got in store for us this evening?
Well, Jacob, I'm so glad that I've just been able to watch your cool, calm, collected manner outside Buckingham Palace today rather than having to get involved. But you deserved that clip to go viral last night, my friend, because it was just astonishing stuff. But we're going to continue the coronation coverage. We have Celia Walden in the house, Angela Levin in the house, plus Nigel Farage reacts live to his bombshell interview with Trump.
Oh, that sounds really exciting. A fantastic cast of characters. That's coming up after the weather. I hope it'll get to warm up a bit. I'll be back tomorrow at 8 p.m, live again from Buckingham Palace. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this has been State of the Nation.
Hello there, welcome to your latest broadcast from the Met Office. I'm Greg Dewhurst. Dry for many over the next 24 hours, though we will see some rain turning up in the southwest, and it will turn increasingly windy too. We can see that the isobars getting closer together as these weather systems start to move in from the Atlantic, bringing the risk of rain initially to southwestern parts of the UK, but this pushing northwards as we head through into the long weekend. Fairly quiet end to the day out there this evening, some misty low cloud in places, still some rain across northern Scotland. This continues during the early hours, but for most it will be a quiet night, some clear spells, some mist and fog patches. Not quite as chilly as recent nights, but in the countryside we could see temperatures down to around 3 or 4 Celsius. But it means a fairly bright start to Thursday morning, some sunny spells, low clouds should lift and break, but we will see some heavy rain moving into the southwest of England. This particularly affecting parts of Devon and Cornwall through the day, but into the afternoon pushes into parts of Wales and then later on into the Midlands. Elsewhere, plenty of sunny spells, a keen easterly wind though holding back temperatures along the east coast, 11 or 12 Celsius, but approaching 20 degrees across central areas in the best of the sunshine. Into the evening time, further showery bands of rain will continue to push northwards, merging to give some longer spells of rain, which will be heavy at times. Dry across parts of Scotland, some low clouds still affecting the east here. And then behind the band of rain, we will see further showers moving in from the south. So it means temperatures not falling as low. We will continue to see single figures in the countryside, but towns and cities holding up in double figures. But it means a much cloudier start to Friday, showery outbreaks of rain for everyone. And then into the afternoon where we get some sunny spells, some really heavy showers developing, some thunder, some hail in there too. But in between, where we get the sunshine, again, temperatures lifting towards the mid-teens. It stays unsettled into the weekend. We'll see some showers or longer spells of rain in places, but staying on the warm side. See you again soon.
It's all about family.